You won't believe what allegedly unfolded behind the walls of Montecito. Imagine the serene Californian mansion, the sun glinting off pristine glass windows, the manicured gardens stretching as far as the eye could see. To outsiders, it looked like the perfect refuge for a royal couple who had traded the pressures of Buckingham Palace for Hollywood-adjacent tranquility. But behind closed doors, a storm was brewing, a storm no one could have predicted. And it began with one shocking revelation from a source no one saw coming. Princess Anne. Meghan was secretly meeting high-profile men behind Harry's back, and reportedly warned. Those words, simple and devastating, didn't just echo in Harry's ears. They detonated, shattering the delicate trust he thought existed between them. How could this be happening? Could the woman he had fought for, the woman he had sheltered from relentless media scrutiny, really be leading a secret life? And more importantly, what would he do next? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let's step back and set the scene. Montecito, a paradise by the sea, complete with sprawling estates, gates that shielded them from prying eyes, and a lifestyle so glamorous it seemed lifted from the pages of a glossy magazine. But paradise has its shadows, and in the world of royalty, no bubble remains unpierced for long. Here, whispers turn into headlines, private dinners become fodder for speculation, and even the closest of allies can find themselves caught in a web of secrets. For Harry, life in Montecito was supposed to be freedom. Freedom from palace protocol. Freedom from endless scrutiny. Freedom to live as he wanted with Meghan and their children. But freedom can be a double-edged sword. It gives space for love and laughter, yes, but it also leaves room for deception to take root, for secrets to fester in plain sight. And when Princess Anne entered the picture, armed with insights only a sharp-eyed royal could possess, Harry's paradise began to crumble. And, known for her unwavering sense of duty and piercing honesty, had always been a figure Harry respected, even if they weren't the closest of allies. Her reputation within the royal family is formidable. She doesn't mince words, and she doesn't tolerate deception. To have her voice cutting through the Californian sunshine with allegations like this, it was a moment that demanded attention. It wasn't hearsay or a fleeting rumor. It was a warning, a signal that something serious was happening, something Harry could no longer ignore. But why now? Why would Princess Anne, thousands of miles away, intervene in a marriage that, publicly at least, appeared intact? The answer lies in the stakes. Harry and Meghan's actions, their associations, their choices, they were never just personal matters. Everything they did had ripple effects, extending beyond their family, beyond the press, and into the delicate balance of public perception. Secrets, if left unchecked, could unravel not just a marriage but a legacy. And in Harry's world, appearances are often as important as truth itself. Consider the implications. The idea that Meghan might be meeting high-profile men in secret is explosive, not just because of who these men might be, but because it challenges the very foundation of trust that Harry built around her. Could it be purely professional, strategic alliances, or something more personal, more intimate? Every possibility gnawed at him, every scenario more unsettling than the last. And as the warning sank in, Harry faced a terrifying clarity. He couldn't ignore this. Not now, not ever. The stakes were higher than mere gossip. In Montecito, privacy is a currency, and betrayal is a debt that can never be repaid. Imagine Harry pacing the halls, the weight of family, love, and duty pressing down. Each knock on the door, each whisper in the air, became magnified. Could Meghan's alleged secret meetings compromise their family? Could they invite scrutiny, humiliation, or worse? Every detail, every unanswered question, demanded attention, and Harry had to act before the storm engulfed them entirely. At the same time, Harry's emotions were a maelstrom. Love and betrayal are complicated enough in ordinary circumstances, but when media scrutiny, public expectation, and royal duty are layered on top, clarity becomes impossible. How do you reconcile devotion with suspicion, trust with fear? And when someone you have relied on for years is suddenly implicated in secrecy, the ground beneath you can feel unsteady, even treacherous. Yet, in the midst of this turmoil, Harry's choices were constrained. Inaction was not an option. Ignoring Princess Anne's revelation could signal weakness passivity, or even complicity. In the royal world, perception often carries as much weight as reality. Harry had to make a decision, one that could define the next chapter of his life, one that could forever alter his relationship with Meghan, with his children, and with the public. And then there's Meghan herself. How did she react to the scrutiny? Did she anticipate the discovery? Was there an awareness that someone as sharp as Princess and could uncover things that she thought were invisible? These questions hover, unanswered but electrifying. Every action, every choice, every conversation could be the key to unlocking a much larger story, one that the public has only glimpsed in snippets, rumors, and tantalizing headlines. This story is not just about a marriage or even about celebrity intrigue. It's about trust, secrecy, and the razor-thin line between private life and public spectacle. It's about a man torn between love and duty, between loyalty to a partner and loyalty to the truth. And it's about revelations so shocking that they don't just make headlines. They redefine relationships, reputations, and realities. By now, you might be wondering, what exactly did Princess Anne reveal? Who were these high-profile men? And most importantly, how did Harry respond to this bombshell? These questions are at the heart of the story, and as we dive deeper, each answer will raise even more, building tension, intrigue, and suspense. And just when it seems the story could not get any more dramatic, the first real confrontation occurred. Harry faced Meghan, not in public, not for the cameras, but in the sanctity of their home. The conversation, the atmosphere, the unspoken emotions, it was an apex moment of tension, a turning point that would ripple through every corner of their lives. And yet, even after this private storm, the public remained blissfully unaware, watching only the curated images and staged appearances, unaware of the seismic shifts occurring behind closed doors. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The Montecito mansion gleamed under the Californian sun, a symbol of peace, luxury, and the life Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had carved out for themselves away from the relentless scrutiny of London and the royal family. On the surface, it was perfection, manicured gardens stretching toward the ocean, a private driveway winding past palms and fountains, security discreetly stationed, yet almost invisible. To anyone who glimpsed their world through glossy magazines or paparazzi photos, this was the epitome of fairy tale living. But appearances, as we know, can be deceiving. And behind the gates of this paradise, tension had been quietly building, unseen by the world and perhaps even unnoticed by the couple themselves, until that tension exploded with the force of revelation. Harry had always been a man caught between worlds. One foot rooted in tradition and duty, the other stepping into the unpredictable terrain of personal freedom and celebrity life. He had left the constraints of royal protocol for a life where he could set his own rules, and yet even here, he could not escape the shadows of responsibility, expectation, and familial scrutiny. Montecito was meant to be a sanctuary, a place to heal, to live as a husband, father, and private citizen. But sanctuaries can harbor secrets, and sometimes, the most pristine gardens conceal the deepest roots of betrayal. Meghan, meanwhile, moved through the house with the grace and confidence that had made her a global figure. She had adapted to the new life with apparent ease, hosting charity events, engaging with social initiatives, and navigating the pressures of media attention with a practiced poise. To outsiders, she was thriving. Yet, beneath the flawless exterior, subtle signs hinted at strain: a late-night call, a quickly closed laptop, a whispered conversation overheard in passing. Small things, almost imperceptible, but enough to create an undercurrent of unease. And in this world of careful observation, where every glance and gesture is scrutinized, even the smallest hint can escalate into suspicion. For Harry, the calm of their life in Montecito was both a relief and a challenge. He cherished the freedom to live openly with his family, yet the freedom also introduced new vulnerabilities. In the palace, there had been rigid structures, clear expectations, and predictable consequences. Here, the rules were softer, but the stakes remained high. Every interaction, every decision, had potential repercussions, not just for his relationship with Meghan, but for their public image, their children's safety, and even the fragile connections to the royal family. Harry had hoped that distance would simplify life, but it had, in many ways, amplified the complexities. The days passed with an uneasy rhythm. Breakfasts overlooking the Pacific, walks along the cliffs, and afternoons spent planning philanthropic initiatives created a facade of normalcy. But behind closed doors, Harry noticed a pattern that unsettled him. There were moments when Meghan seemed preoccupied, distracted. Calls came at odd hours, sometimes with abrupt endings. Messages appeared on her phone that were quickly deleted. In a house that thrived on routine and transparency, these anomalies stood out like glaring red flags. And then came the moment that changed everything. A call from Princess Anne. Known for her sharp wit, no-nonsense demeanor, and unparalleled loyalty to the family, and rarely involved herself directly in Harry's life unless circumstances demanded it. But this call was urgent, and the weight in her voice left Harry with no choice but to listen closely. Anne's words cut through the calm. "Harry, you need to know, Meghan has been meeting high-profile men behind your back." The statement, delivered without hesitation or softening, landed like a thunderclap. Harry's mind raced. The idea was almost impossible to process. Was this a misunderstanding? Could it be miscommunication, exaggeration, or even rumor? But Princess Anne's reputation for precision, her years of navigating royal intrigues with unmatched clarity, made doubt nearly impossible. She wouldn't say such a thing lightly, and she certainly wouldn't involve herself without cause. In the days that followed, Harry found himself examining every detail of his life with Meghan through a new lens. He replayed conversations, retraced footsteps, and scrutinized schedules. Was it possible that the idyllic days in Montecito masked secrets that could unravel everything? Every detail, no matter how small, took on new significance. A dinner with friends, a business meeting, a casual outing. All were now examined under the microscope of suspicion. Meghan's demeanor remained outwardly calm. She continued with her commitments, appearing unaffected, even cheerful. But Harry noticed subtle shifts. The way she looked away when he asked certain questions, the defensive tone when certain topics arose. These nuances, seemingly minor to outsiders, became magnified in Harry's mind. The perfect life they had built suddenly felt fragile, like a glass sculpture teetering on the edge of a table. The mansion itself became a stage for tension. Conversations that once flowed freely now carried an undercurrent of caution. Harry's trust, long unwavering, was now tinged with doubt. The weight of knowledge from Princess Anne's revelation made ordinary interactions feel charged, each glance and gesture loaded with potential meaning. It was no longer just a home. It was a crucible testing the limits of loyalty, love, and honesty. And yet, despite the emotional storm, Harry struggled with action. How do you confront someone you love with allegations so explosive? How do you weigh the potential fallout against the need for truth? These questions haunted him, keeping him awake in the quiet hours of the night, pacing the halls, grappling with emotions that swung wildly between disbelief, anger, and sorrow. As the tension built, the first cracks in their relationship became visible. Arguments erupted over minor issues, often disguised as casual disagreements, but fueled by the larger unspoken conflict. The air was thick with unsaid words, with suspicions that neither wanted to vocalize, but both could feel. Friends noticed the change. Staff observed subtle shifts in routine. Even the serene Montecito landscape seemed to echo the unease within the walls of the mansion. And yet, amidst the tension, Harry remained vigilant. He sought clarity, sought confirmation, sought a path forward that balanced love, justice, and self-respect. He began documenting events, tracking interactions, and seeking counsel from those he trusted most. Every step was measured, calculated, yet underlined by a sense of urgency. The revelation from Princess Anne had set a countdown in motion, a timeline that could not be ignored. The world outside remained blissfully unaware. Fans, media, and casual observers saw only the curated moments, smiles on the red carpet, philanthropic initiatives, and family snapshots in idyllic settings. But behind the camera, a private drama was unfolding, one that had the potential to redefine not just a marriage but the public perception of the couple. Harry and Meghan, once symbols of romance and rebellion, now stood at the center of a narrative fraught with betrayal, secrecy, and high-stakes decisions. And just when the tension reached its peak, when every glance, Every word seemed loaded with implication. Harry made the first move toward confronting the reality that Princess and had exposed. The calm before the storm was over. The idol of Montecito had shattered, replaced by a landscape of uncertainty, suspicion, and unavoidable confrontation. But what Harry didn't yet realize was that the confrontation would not just reveal secrets. It would trigger a chain of events that none of them could have predicted. The world often forgets that Princess and the Princess Royal is not just another member of the British royal family. She is, in many ways, the family's most disciplined observer, a woman whose intuition is as sharp as her sense of duty. Known for her directness, her no-nonsense approach to life, and her ability to cut through layers of pretense, and had earned respect from courtiers, peers, and even critics. Few could match her when it came to detecting deception, inconsistencies, or hidden motives within the royal circle. And when she noticed something amiss with Meghan Markle, she acted swiftly and without hesitation. It all began with the small but telling signs. And, though not living near Montecito, maintained her network of contacts and connections, trusted friends, advisors, and informants who kept her aware of the lives of her family members, regardless of oceans or continents. She had long observed the couple's transition to California, their media strategy, and the carefully curated public image they presented. And while she admired their desire for independence, her instincts had always warned her that distance could conceal secrets, that even the most private sanctuary could harbor surprises. Then the reports began trickling in. Meetings that were supposedly innocuous, social outings under the guise of charity work, and interactions with influential figures. All details that, when isolated, seemed harmless, but when pieced together, painted a different picture. And, ever meticulous, cross-referenced information, asked pointed questions of trusted sources, and tracked inconsistencies. The puzzle began to emerge, a mosaic of hints suggesting that Meghan might be engaging in encounters far beyond the casual professional sphere, encounters that Harry had not been privy to. Anne's concern wasn't born of judgment or malice. It stemmed from loyalty and foresight. She understood Harry's character, the deep sense of trust he placed in those he loved, the way he tried to shield those around him from criticism or intrusion. She knew that if this information were not communicated, Harry could be blindsided in ways that would devastate him personally and potentially publicly. Anne's intervention, blunt and uncompromising, was her way of protecting her nephew from what she perceived as betrayal. The call itself was succinct yet loaded with weight. "Harry," she said, her voice steady but firm, "you need to know. Meghan has been meeting high-profile men behind your back." There was no hesitation, no sugarcoating, no suggestion that it might be a misunderstanding, and delivered the words as facts, not accusations. And for Harry, hearing the statement from and someone whose judgment he trusted implicitly was like being hit by a tidal wave. Harry's reaction was a mixture of disbelief and immediate concern. How could this be true? Were these encounters professional, or were they something else entirely? And if they were personal, how long had they been happening? The questions cascaded through his mind with increasing urgency, each one sharper than the last. And, sensing his turmoil, did not offer reassurances. Her role was not to console. It was to illuminate the truth, however uncomfortable it might be. The Princess Royal's reputation for discernment is well documented. She has long been a behind-the-scenes force in the royal family, ensuring that matters of protocol, loyalty, and integrity are upheld. Her ability to parse subtle signals, tone of voice, body language, and behavioral patterns is legendary. When Anne raises a red flag, it is rarely without substance. And now, thousands of miles away, she had activated that same skill to alert Harry to a crisis brewing in his own home. Anne's involvement added layers of complexity. She was not only a conduit of critical information, she was also a reminder of the royal standards Harry had once been bound by, and perhaps still felt tethered to, despite his physical distance from the monarchy. Her words carried moral weight, the implicit expectation that Harry would act responsibly and decisively. In essence, Anne was issuing both a warning and a directive. The matter could not be ignored. As Harry absorbed the gravity of the revelation, he reflected on the subtle signs he had noticed but had dismissed. The late-night calls, the sudden shifts in schedules, the vague explanations for social interactions. they now took on a sinister dimension. Anne's insight transformed ambiguity into clarity, suspicion into actionable concern. It was a moment that crystallized the tension he had been feeling but could not articulate. For Meghan, if she was aware of Anne's scrutiny, it is unclear how she processed it. There is no record of confrontation prior to the revelation reaching Harry. Perhaps she sensed the undercurrent of observation, the silent monitoring that comes with being married into a family as vigilant and precise as the royals. Perhaps she felt untouchable, confident that her actions were invisible or justified. Either way, the intervention from Princess Anne shifted the equilibrium, transforming a private pattern of behavior into a looming crisis. Anne's approach was emblematic of her character. She does not involve herself lightly, and when she does, she ensures the message is unmistakable. Her intervention was surgical in precision, clear, factual, and devoid of embellishment. She did not speculate on motives, nor did she cast judgment on Meghan's character. Instead, she delivered information, knowing full well that Harry, guided by his judgment and emotional intelligence, would need to make the consequential decisions that followed. It is worth noting that Anne's insight likely drew from years of observation and familial knowledge. She understands dynamics that outsiders cannot, nuances in behavior that escape the casual observer. Her awareness of Meghan's social circles, her interactions with influential figures, and even her past history would have informed Anne's perspective. For Harry, receiving such information from someone with this depth of understanding was both a blessing and a burden. It provided clarity but also imposed an almost unbearable responsibility. After the call, Harry's days became a delicate balance of reflection and observation. He had to reassess everything he had previously considered mundane, from casual conversations to professional meetings. Every detail became a potential clue, every interaction a piece of a puzzle he now had no choice but to solve. Anne's warning was a lens through which he now viewed the world, amplifying suspicion while demanding discretion. Friends and aides began to notice subtle changes in Harry's behavior. He was more contemplative, more deliberate in his movements, less inclined to casual conversation. The burden of knowledge weighed heavily on him, and the looming confrontation with Meghan became inevitable. Anne's intervention had set in motion a series of events that could not be reversed. The question now was how Harry would respond, and what repercussions would ripple outward from the private walls of Montecito. And, from her vantage point, had done her part. She had alerted Harry, provided the crucial information, and ensured that the warning was neither diluted nor delayed. The rest was now in his hands. For a man who has always sought to protect those he loves while navigating the intricate pressures of public life, the challenge was monumental. Every decision carried emotional, relational, and reputational consequences. And just when Harry thought he could start processing the magnitude of the situation, a new layer of complexity emerged. Evidence, subtle yet undeniable, began to surface that hinted at the scale and nature of Meghan's alleged secret encounters. Invitations, unplanned meetings, and discreet communications all painted a picture that was increasingly difficult to ignore. It became clear that Anne's warning was only the beginning. What lay ahead was a confrontation with reality, with truth, and with the emotional consequences that could not be mitigated. But what came next would push Harry to a breaking point. And no one outside Montecito could have anticipated the chain of events that were about to unfold. The idea that Meghan Markle could be secretly meeting high-profile men behind Harry's back seemed almost too sensational to be true. Yet, by the time Princess Anne's warning reached Harry, the fragments of evidence had begun to coalesce into a troubling mosaic. These weren't mere casual encounters or professional networking events. They were meetings that, according to the sources entrusted, carried a significance far beyond social pleasantries. And in Harry's world, where trust was sacred and loyalty paramount, the implications were staggering. Harry began piecing together the clues, replaying every moment in his mind with painstaking scrutiny. Invitations that had seemed routine now carried a different weight. A lunch with a well-connected executive, previously dismissed as a charitable discussion, now took on a more clandestine hue. A late-night meeting at a discreet Los Angeles venue, which Meghan had described as a brief consultation, now appeared to fit a pattern and had been observing from afar. Each instance, once innocent on the surface, now hinted at a hidden web of interactions. The most unsettling aspect wasn't just the frequency of these encounters, but the nature of the men involved. High-profile figures, men with power, influence, and access to circles Harry had previously only encountered peripherally, now entered the picture. Who were they? Why were these meetings conducted in secrecy? And most importantly, what was being discussed? Every question gnawed at Harry, intensifying the sense of betrayal he felt. It wasn't just the secrecy that alarmed him, it was the context. Harry knew the stakes. These were not ordinary social engagements. They were opportunities where influence could be wielded, alliances could be formed, and reputations could be shaped. And while Meghan had undoubtedly been involved in legitimate ventures, charity initiatives, speaking engagements, and professional collaborations, the clandestine nature of these encounters suggested a different agenda, one that Harry had no role in and, crucially, no control over. He recalled one particular instance that stood out vividly in his memory. Meghan had described attending a high-profile networking dinner as just a brief catch-up. Yet the event had been held in a private, members-only club known for hosting influential figures in finance, media, and politics. The guest list, when later reviewed, included individuals whose prominence and reach were staggering. And while Harry had initially assumed the meeting was benign, the combination of secrecy and high-profile attendance triggered alarm bells. He began to see a pattern. These weren't isolated events. They were part of a network of interactions deliberately shielded from his knowledge. Friends close to the couple began noticing subtle changes as well. Meghan's demeanor during these periods of heightened activity was different, more guarded, less willing to share details, and occasionally distracted. Staff members observed late-night arrivals and departures, abrupt scheduling changes, and the hurried concealment of communications. Individually, these might have seemed inconsequential, but collectively, they painted a picture that aligned with Anne's warning. The emotional toll on Harry was immediate and intense. He oscillated between disbelief, anger, and sorrow, struggling to reconcile the public persona of the woman he loved with the private behaviors he was now uncovering. The duality was staggering. Meghan, the devoted mother and charitable advocate, and Meghan, the woman allegedly navigating a secret world of powerful, high-profile connections unknown to her husband. How could these two versions exist simultaneously? And more pressingly, which version was the truth? In the quiet hours, Harry began documenting events meticulously. Every invitation, every unexplained meeting, every sudden change in routine was noted. He cross-referenced dates, checked guest lists, and compiled a mental ledger of anomalies. The process was both methodical and exhausting, a reflection of his desire to find clarity amidst confusion. He needed answers, but the deeper he dug, the more complex the picture became. There were moments of confrontation, subtle, probing questions that Harry posed during casual interactions. Meghan's responses, carefully measured, often deflected without outright denial. The ambiguity only heightened his suspicion. Was she hiding something, or merely navigating her own world with discretion? And if she was hiding something, how extensive was it? Each answer, each nuance, seemed to open more questions than it resolved. Anne's intervention, once removed from the physical space of Montecito, now felt immediate and pressing. The Princess Royal had not simply alerted Harry to potential issues. She had essentially placed a responsibility on him to act, to investigate, and to protect both himself and the integrity of their household. The knowledge weighed heavily, a constant presence in Harry's mind, influencing every decision, every interaction, and every moment of reflection. The meetings themselves varied in context and scope. Some were reportedly business-oriented, involving discussions of media ventures, charitable initiatives, and social causes. Others, however, were less easily categorized. Late-night dinners, private consultations, and meetings with individuals known for influence and discretion suggested motives that were not entirely transparent. The pattern was subtle, insidious even, and the secrecy surrounding them compounded the impact. Harry's emotional journey during this period was a turbulent one. He grappled with feelings of betrayal that cut deep, questioning not just the nature of Meghan's interactions, but also his own judgment. Had he been too trusting? Too naive? Could he have seen the signs earlier, noticed the small deviations, and acted before things escalated? The self-recrimination, combined with the shock of Anne's revelations, created a maelstrom of internal conflict that left him emotionally raw. To complicate matters, public appearances and the ongoing media narrative added layers of pressure. The couple was under constant observation, their every move scrutinized and analyzed by both professional media and the casual observer. Harry knew that any overt confrontation or visible tension could become fodder for speculation, potentially magnifying the consequences of private indiscretions into public scandal. The stakes were astronomical. Every decision carried potential fallout that extended beyond personal heartbreak, touching careers, reputations, and the perception of the royal family as a whole. The timing of these alleged meetings was equally significant. They coincided with periods of intense media focus on the couple's philanthropic work, interviews, and social engagements. This overlap suggested not just coincidence, but deliberate timing, a calculated approach to maintain a public facade while engaging in activities unknown to Harry. The realization that secrecy had been maintained so carefully only deepened the sense of betrayal. As Harry confronted these revelations, he began to understand the enormity of the challenge ahead. This was no longer a matter of casual suspicion or minor misunderstanding. It was a structural disruption of the trust and intimacy that underpinned his marriage. How does one navigate a relationship when the foundation of transparency is fractured? How does a husband respond when confronted with evidence, however circumstantial, of secret interactions that undermine that trust? And yet, even amidst the turmoil, Harry sought understanding. He attempted to separate fact from assumption, to parse motive from opportunity. He knew the importance of measured action, of gathering clarity before confrontation. But the longer the silence persisted, the more the tension within Montecito intensified. Every glance, every word, every unspoken interaction became charged with meaning, a delicate dance of suspicion and restraint. The narrative of the alleged secret meetings was still unfolding, like a thriller in slow motion. Each revelation, each new piece of information, increased the stakes, reshaping the contours of Harry and Meghan's private world. And while the public remained unaware, the private universe of Montecito had shifted irrevocably, leaving Harry to navigate a labyrinth of secrecy, emotion, and high-stakes decision-making. But what Harry did not yet realize was that uncovering these meetings was only the beginning. The true consequences, the confrontations, the choices, and the fallout were still on the horizon. And when they arrived, they would redefine not only his relationship with Meghan, but also the very sanctuary they had built in Montecito. Harry sat in the quiet of his Montecito study, the California sunlight slanting through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. The revelations from Princess and weighed heavily on his mind. The alleged secret meetings, the subtle deceptions, the inconsistencies, all coalesced into a storm of uncertainty and anguish. Harry had always prided himself on his instincts, his judgment, and his ability to navigate the complexities of life in the public eye. But this was different. This was personal, and it cut deep. How do you reconcile love with betrayal? How do you act when someone you trust implicitly may have been hiding layers of secrets right under your nose? Harry had spent years trying to protect Meghan, shielding her from the relentless glare of the media, defending her from critics, and carving out a life where she could flourish away from the suffocating scrutiny of London. And yet now, he faced a reality that challenged every assumption he had made about their relationship. The dilemma was multifaceted. On one hand, Harry felt the protective instinct of a husband, a desire to confront the issue privately, to understand fully before taking any action. On the other, the sense of betrayal was acute, visceral, and demanding of immediate attention. Could he trust Meghan to explain, to confess, or to offer clarity? Or had the trust that had defined their marriage been irreparably fractured? Every scenario seemed fraught with peril. Harry's thoughts turned to the children. Archie and Lilibet, innocent and unknowing, were caught in the middle of a world far more complicated than any child should face. How would his decisions affect them? Could the family remain intact if the foundation of trust was shaken? Could love endure in the shadow of secrecy? These questions gnawed at him relentlessly, intensifying the already crushing weight of the dilemma. Anne's warning had forced Harry into a position he had long feared. He had to choose between loyalty and action, between the hope of reconciliation and the certainty of consequences. Ignoring the revelations was not an option. The longer he waited, the more entrenched the secrets could become, and the more damaging the eventual fallout might be. But confronting Meghan carried risks of its own: emotional rupture, public exposure, and the potential for irreversible damage to their family unit. As he considered his options, Harry replayed past interactions with Meghan. The casual conversations, the small gestures, the intimate moments, they all took on new, sometimes suspicious, meanings. Was there a pattern he had missed? Were there signs he had overlooked in his desire to see the best in her? The self-questioning was relentless. In the quiet of Montecito, doubt became a constant companion, whispering uncertainties that made each decision feel heavier than the last. The stakes were heightened by the public dimension of their lives. Every action, every decision, had ramifications that extended beyond the walls of the mansion. The media, with its insatiable appetite for scandal, was always just a heartbeat away. One misstep, one emotional outburst, one poorly timed confrontation could transform private pain into a public spectacle, a story dissected by commentators and scrutinized by millions worldwide. Harry had experienced this before, but the difference now was intimacy. This was a personal betrayal, not just a headline. In his solitude, Harry considered the possible outcomes. Confront Meghan directly, risking a heated argument but gaining clarity. Seek external counsel, carefully curating advice from trusted friends or advisors. Observe discreetly, gathering evidence to ensure that any action taken was informed and measured. Each option carried potential consequences, each path lined with uncertainty. The emotional complexity was compounded by Harry's sense of identity. He had spent his life balancing public duty with personal authenticity, navigating the treacherous intersection of royal expectation and personal desire. This dilemma forced him to confront questions of integrity, loyalty, and self-respect. Could he forgive if deception was confirmed? Could he maintain composure in the face of betrayal? And perhaps most painfully, could he continue to love someone who had apparently undermined the very trust that bound them together? Friends and confidants offered fragmented guidance, some urging patience, others advocating for immediate action. Yet Harry knew that no advice could substitute for his own judgment, his own instincts, his own understanding of the woman he loved and the man he had become. The weight of responsibility rested squarely on his shoulders, a burden made heavier by the intimacy of the relationships at stake. The dilemma extended beyond the personal to the philosophical. What does it mean to trust someone fully? How do you balance forgiveness with accountability? And in a world where public perception can distort reality, how do you ensure that your actions are both just and true to your values? Harry grappled with these questions in long, sleepless nights, pacing the halls of the mansion, sometimes stopping to stare out at the vast Pacific, searching for clarity in the horizon's calm, only to find the turmoil within mirrored in the endless waves. Every decision carried emotional reverberations. Confronting Meghan risked confrontation, anger, and recrimination. Silence risked complicity, erosion of self-respect, and the insidious growth of doubt. Withdrawal risked isolation, loss of intimacy, and the public perception of weakness. Harry's dilemma was a crucible, a test of character, resilience, and emotional intelligence, and each potential path was fraught with peril. And then there was the question of timing. When should he act? Immediate confrontation could offer answers, but risk explosive escalation. Delayed action allowed for reflection, but could permit further deception or misunderstandings. Every moment of inaction felt like a choice in itself, a slow-burning tension that intensified the emotional stakes with each passing hour. As Harry navigated this labyrinth of emotion and consequence, he became acutely aware of the duality of his world. Montecito, with its beauty and seclusion, offered sanctuary but also a pressure cooker for unresolved tension. The idyllic surroundings, the sun, the ocean, the gardens, contrasted starkly with the storm raging within the walls of his home. The physical space became a metaphor for the emotional complexity, serene on the surface, chaotic beneath. Harry's dilemma was a balancing act between love and betrayal, action and patience, public responsibility and private emotion. He had to weigh the facts, discern the truth, and act in a way that preserved his integrity while confronting the undeniable breach of trust. And as he wrestled with these competing forces, he realized that the coming confrontation would not just resolve a personal dilemma. It would redefine the very contours of his life, his marriage, and his future in ways that could not yet be imagined. But just as clarity began to emerge, Harry discovered a detail that made the dilemma even more urgent. Evidence suggesting that the meetings were not isolated incidents, but part of a recurring pattern. And in that revelation lay a decision he could no longer delay, a confrontation that was imminent, and a choice that would shape the next chapter of their lives, forever. The Montecito mansion, usually a sanctuary of quiet elegance, suddenly felt smaller, more confining, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The air was thick with tension, and even the usual sounds of the ocean crashing against the cliffs outside seemed muted, as though nature itself was holding its breath. Harry moved through the house with a deliberate awareness, each step measured, each glance sharpened. He knew the confrontation with Meghan was inevitable, and yet, the emotional stakes made each passing minute almost unbearable. Preparation became both a necessity and a coping mechanism. Harry paced the grand halls, rehearsing words, imagining potential responses, anticipating deflections, and preparing for denial. In his mind, he ran through scenarios again and again. Calm, measured conversation, pointed questions, emotional revelations, tears, anger, explanations that could range from total honesty to carefully constructed evasions. Every permutation demanded consideration, every outcome carried consequences. And through it all, the central question remained. How much could he endure, and how much could he forgive? Meghan, for her part, seemed unaware, or at least outwardly so, of the storm gathering behind the scrutiny of Princess Anne's warning and Harry's mounting suspicions. She moved through the house with her usual poise, attending to routines, hosting calls, and engaging with staff and friends. But subtle cues did not escape Harry's attention. The slight hesitation in her tone, the quickening of her pace when certain topics were mentioned, the rapid closure of her laptop during unexpected interruptions, small signals that now seemed pregnant with significance. Harry had always approached conflict with a mix of empathy and assertiveness, but this situation required a new level of emotional calculation. He needed to confront, to seek truth, and to protect himself and his family. Yet he also had to navigate the delicate balance of love, respect, and potential reconciliation. Every decision in this high-stakes emotional chess game had to be deliberate. As he waited for the moment of confrontation, Harry reflected on the irony of Montecito itself. The sprawling estate, intended as a haven from the pressures of royal life, had instead become a crucible. The privacy that allowed them to live free of paparazzi scrutiny now amplified the tension, turning silence into suspense and absence of evidence into uncertainty. The very sanctuary meant to protect them was, paradoxically, the stage for the most consequential conversation of their lives. Friends and confidants who were aware of the growing tension had advised Harry to gather his thoughts, to document what he knew, and to approach Meghan calmly. Yet the emotional weight of betrayal and suspicion made serenity nearly impossible. The human heart does not function in isolation from its emotions. Anger, sorrow, and the sting of perceived disloyalty all swirled within him, demanding attention even as reason urged restraint. The initial approach was cautious. Harry engaged in small talk, probing subtly, observing responses, and noting inconsistencies. Questions were posed in casual tones, designed to elicit information without triggering defensiveness. Yet even these measured interactions revealed cracks. Meghan's expressions, tone, and gestures offered fragments of insight, hints of evasiveness or distraction that, when combined with prior observations, confirmed Harry's growing unease. The emotional landscape was complicated further by history. Harry recalled earlier challenges in their relationship, moments of tension, disagreements, and reconciliations that had shaped their bond. Each memory now took on new weight, reframed through the lens of secrecy and suspicion. Could the love they shared withstand the weight of hidden truths? Could trust be restored once it had been fractured? These questions haunted him relentlessly, making the impending confrontation all the more critical. At the same time, The couple's children were never far from Harry's thoughts. Archie and Lilibet were innocent bystanders, oblivious to the currents of tension flowing beneath the surface. Harry's desire to shield them from emotional upheaval added another layer of complexity. He knew that any argument, any public display of discord, could ripple outward, affecting not just his own sense of security, but the emotional well-being of his family. The stakes were higher than ever, combining the personal with the familial, the emotional with the practical. The confrontation itself was inevitable. Harry's pulse quickened as he approached Meghan one afternoon, the weight of knowledge pressing down with crushing intensity. Every movement, every glance, every word carried significance. There was no room for error, no margin for misinterpretation. This was not simply a conversation, it was a turning point, a moment that could determine the trajectory of their relationship and the stability of their home. In preparing for the confrontation, Harry rehearsed both what he intended to say and how he might respond to denial, deflection, or emotional manipulation. He considered the possibility of honesty, partial truths, and outright lies. He imagined the defensive mechanisms Meghan might deploy and the strategies he could use to maintain clarity and focus. Every emotional contingency was accounted for, yet even with careful preparation, the unpredictability of human emotion made the outcome uncertain. The tension escalated as Meghan entered the room, unaware of the emotional storm gathering within Harry. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the room was suspended in silence. Words hung unspoken, emotions raw and palpable. Harry felt the weight of betrayal, the pull of love, and the necessity of confrontation converge in that instant. This was the defining moment he had both feared and anticipated. Questions were posed, calmly, yet with an edge that betrayed the inner turmoil. Meghan's responses were measured, sometimes evasive, sometimes deflective, but always poised. The subtle dance of conversation, of probing and withholding, revealed both intentions and vulnerabilities. Harry's internal struggle intensified, balancing emotional honesty with strategic necessity, compassion with self-preservation, love with accountability. The room seemed to contract around them. Every gesture, every tone, every hesitation was magnified. The sanctuary of Montecito, intended as a place of safety and reprieve, had become a crucible of truth and revelation. And as the conversation unfolded, Harry realized that this confrontation would not merely expose secrets. It would force decisions that could not be undone, consequences that could not be mitigated, and choices that would shape the future of their family and their lives in ways neither of them could yet fully comprehend. And just when the confrontation seemed to reach its peak, when every word and glance carried unbearable weight, a new piece of information surfaced, unexpected, shocking, and potentially decisive. It was the kind of revelation that had the power to tip the balance entirely, forcing action, reshaping perception, and altering the course of events in ways that would echo far beyond the walls of Montecito. But what came next would push Harry to act in a way he had never imagined, and the consequences would ripple through their lives with a force no one could anticipate. The confrontation in Montecito had begun, and Harry now faced the woman he had loved, trusted, and fought for, yet one whose actions, according to Princess Anne, suggested a hidden life beyond his knowledge. Meghan stood across from him, composed, poised, her expression carefully controlled. She knew the stakes, even if Harry could only guess at what she understood. In that moment, the room became a battleground of emotions, words, and intentions. Meghan's defense was subtle, almost surgical. She denied wrongdoing without appearing defensive, explained her actions with plausible reasoning, and framed the meetings as professional, strategic, and necessary. To an outsider, it could appear entirely credible. A high-profile woman navigating a world of influential contacts, balancing philanthropy, media projects, and personal ambitions. But to Harry, the careful construction of explanations felt layered, complex, and, at times, deliberately opaque. Harry listened, trying to reconcile the confident, articulate woman before him with the web of secrecy he had been warned about. Each word she spoke was weighed against his knowledge, against the timing of meetings, against the fragments of evidence and had brought to light. The tension was electric, emotional spikes punctuated by silence, pauses laden with unspoken questions, and the ever-present weight of potential betrayal. Every meeting, Meghan explained, was related to projects, causes, and initiatives we both care about. You know how important this work is, and I've always kept you informed where it matters. Her tone was calm, her expression steady, yet there was a subtle defensiveness in her eyes. Harry noted it immediately, interpreting it as a sign of caution, perhaps even calculated persuasion. He asked questions carefully, probing for clarity. But why the secrecy? Why not share details earlier, openly? Meghan responded with practiced grace. Timing, context, privacy. All framed as necessary measures in a world of media scrutiny and potential misinterpretation. Her reasoning was layered, strategic, and emotionally intelligent, appealing both to logic and sentiment. But Harry's instincts told him there was more beneath the surface. The emotional tension escalated when Harry referenced the specific meetings and had highlighted. He could feel the weight of each moment pressing down, the uncertainty of what he might uncover, the possibility of further deception. Meghan maintained her composure, countering each point with explanations that were believable on the surface, yet left lingering doubts in the subtext. It was a dance of truth and deflection, each step measured, each response carefully calibrated. Harry's inner turmoil was relentless. The desire to believe her, to reconcile the dissonance between love and suspicion, clashed with the imperative to protect himself, their family, and their integrity. Could he trust her words fully? Or was there a layer of truth deliberately withheld? Every answer seemed to create new questions, every explanation a labyrinth of possibilities. In the quiet moments between words, Harry noticed subtle cues, a flicker of hesitation, a brief downward glance, the subtle tension in her jaw. He analyzed each micro-expression, aware that human emotion rarely lies entirely, even when words are carefully crafted. Yet, the evidence remained circumstantial, the narrative complex, and the lines between explanation and obfuscation blurred. Meghan's defense relied heavily on reframing. She emphasized her professional obligations, her network of influence, and the need for discretion in managing relationships with powerful figures. You know the world we operate in, she said. It's not just personal, it's strategic. Timing, confidentiality, and careful management are crucial. I never meant to deceive you, Harry. Her words appealed both to logic and empathy, reminding him of the high-stakes nature of their public and philanthropic roles. Harry grappled with the duality of the moment. The woman he loved, speaking with sincerity and poise, versus the accumulation of secrecy and suspicion that had brought him to this confrontation. The emotional spikes were relentless. Waves of anger, hurt, disbelief, and lingering affection collided in rapid succession. Each breath he took was a measure of restraint, each question a balancing act between confrontation and composure. The conversation took unexpected turns. Meghan subtly turned the focus back on Harry, questioning assumptions, emphasizing trust, and highlighting the pressures of public life. She argued that the interpretation of secrecy could be misleading, that appearances often deceived, and that intentions mattered more than perception. Her emotional intelligence was formidable, designed to diffuse tension while subtly asserting her perspective. Harry's internal conflict intensified. He wanted clarity, honesty, and reassurance, yet every explanation seemed to open new avenues of doubt. The challenge was not simply uncovering facts, but discerning motive, intent, and truth amidst layers of defensible reasoning. How could he separate what was strategic from what was personal? What constituted necessary discretion versus deliberate concealment? These questions consumed him, making each interaction a crucible of judgment and emotion. At the heart of the defense was the question of trust. Meghan emphasized loyalty, love, and shared values, reminding Harry of the bond they had built together. Yet, in doing so, she also challenged him. Could he continue to trust when evidence suggested potential deception? Could love survive when secrecy, even if well-intentioned, had created fissures in the foundation of their relationship? The questions were agonizing, the answers uncertain. The confrontation stretched over hours, a tense interplay of dialogue, emotion, and unspoken subtext. Harry's mind oscillated between hope and suspicion, desire and disappointment, clarity and confusion. He knew that the decisions he made in these moments would have lasting consequences. Personal, familial, and public. Every nuance mattered. Every reaction weighed heavily. Every word carried potential impact. And yet, despite Meghan's articulate defense, Harry sensed that not all truths had been laid bare. There were shadows in her explanations, gaps in timelines, and subtleties in demeanor that suggested more remained hidden. The realization was both painful and inevitable. While some questions could be addressed through dialogue, others required action, observation, and ultimately, resolution. The confrontation reached a pivotal point when Harry posed a direct question. Were there encounters that went beyond professional obligations? The room seemed to contract, the air charged with tension. Meghan's response was measured, her composure intact, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something unspoken, a hesitation that confirmed, at least to Harry, that the landscape was more complex than he had imagined. This moment crystallized the dilemma. Meghan's defense was persuasive, emotionally compelling, and strategically framed. Yet the subtext, the inconsistencies, and the weight of prior knowledge created an unbridgeable tension. Harry realized that while conversation could provide insight, it could not resolve the fundamental issue of trust. Action was required. Decisions had to be made. Consequences were unavoidable. The confrontation ended not with resolution, but with suspended tension. Both parties withdrew to reflect, to process, and to consider the next steps. The sanctuary of Montecito, once a place of tranquility, had become a stage for revelation, confrontation, and decision-making. The emotional stakes were higher than ever, and the next moves would determine the trajectory of their lives. But what came next would force Harry to act decisively. And the result would reverberate far beyond the walls of the mansion, reshaping the contours of their relationship in ways no one could have predicted. The private storm within Montecito had already begun to spill into the public consciousness, although few outside the walls of the mansion could grasp its full magnitude. What started as whispers among close friends, advisors, and royal confidants soon found its way to the media, where speculation metastasized into headlines, social media posts, and viral commentary. And at the center of it all was Princess Anne, whose revelation to Harry, that Meghan had allegedly been meeting high-profile men behind his back, had now become the spark igniting a media frenzy. Harry watched the coverage with a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and dread. The media landscape, once an invisible threat lurking at the edges of his life, had become an active participant in the unfolding drama. Stories appeared across outlets with dizzying speed, some sourced to unnamed insiders, others crafted from speculation and rumor. Each new report, each fragment of information, added layers of complexity to a situation that had already become emotionally overwhelming. For the public, the narrative was seductive: scandal, secrecy, betrayal, the elements of a story that captivated audiences and generated clicks in equal measure. Headlines screamed about clandestine meetings, hidden agendas, and the fissures within one of the most famous royal relationships in the world. The very elements that Harry had grappled with privately were now being dissected, analyzed, and broadcast globally. The couple's sanctuary in Montecito, intended as a refuge from such scrutiny, suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable, and public. Anne's role, once strictly private, became a point of fascination. Media outlets speculated about how the Princess Royal had acquired knowledge of Meghan's alleged encounters and what her motivations might have been. Analysts debated whether Anne had overstepped her bounds, intervened out of concern for Harry, or sought to maintain family integrity at all costs. The intrigue was compounded by Anne's reputation for candor and discretion, which lent credibility to the reports, even as uncertainty lingered about the specifics. In Montecito, the tension escalated. Harry found himself navigating not only the emotional aftermath of Meghan's alleged actions, but also the relentless scrutiny of a global audience eager for confirmation, detail, and drama. Every interaction, every word, every gesture carried amplified significance, as media narratives framed events in ways that could not always be controlled. The line between private conflict and public spectacle blurred, leaving Harry to manage both the intimate and the performative dimensions of his life. The leaks and reports also placed Meghan in a precarious position. While she maintained her public composure, internally the scrutiny added pressure and stress. Every appearance, every statement, every smile was now read through the lens of suspicion. The defensive strategies she had employed within Montecito, careful framing, plausible explanations, and emotional intelligence, were now tested against an audience of millions who had no access to context or nuance. The dynamics of privacy and perception collided, creating a high-stakes environment in which missteps could be costly. Friends and advisors offered guidance, yet their counsel was constrained by the very public nature of the unfolding events. Advice on managing private matters became inseparable from strategies for media management, reputation preservation, and public perception. Harry and Meghan had to act in ways that balanced truth, emotion, and optics, a balancing act that heightened stress and complicated decision-making. Amid this media maelstrom, Harry considered the consequences of public perception on his own emotional state and capacity for decision-making. The pressure was relentless. Knowing that every choice would be scrutinized, misinterpreted, or amplified made the confrontation with Meghan and the subsequent steps toward resolution even more daunting. He realized that action, in this context, was not just personal. It was political, social, and symbolic. Anne's revelation, now public, also affected the dynamics within the royal family. Statements, both formal and informal, were analyzed for nuance, tone, and implication. Royal watchers debated alliances, loyalties, and motives, speculating on how the disclosure might influence future interactions between Harry, Meghan, and other family members. The ripple effects of a single revelation illustrated the delicate web of relationships, obligations, and expectations that governed life within the royal sphere. For Harry, the media coverage created a new dimension of urgency. What could have remained a private, contained conflict was now a matter of public debate, with every report carrying potential ramifications for his reputation, his family's well-being, and the broader narrative surrounding the couple.